We are transmitting live from San Diego, California, from the studios of KPBS on the campus of San Diego State University. Greetings to our participants in Mexico, Colombia, and Paraguay in Latin America. We would also like to welcome our distinguished friends at the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C. We would like to once again thank Telecomunicaciones de México and PANAMSAT for their satellite linkage services, which allow us to reach all of you through the wonders of telecommunications. Welcome to the program Benchmarking, the sixth and final video conference in the 1994 series Management Systems for the 21st Century. I am Armando Osorio, your moderator for this teleconference. We would like to remind the coordinators at each receive site to collect the attendance sheets for your site and to return them to the International Training Center as soon as possible, together with a list of names of participants interested in obtaining the certificate for this program. Today's topic, benchmarking, is a new and exciting management approach with an external orientation which stresses constant evaluation of internal work activities against standards already set by the most successful organizations. It is a process of discovery as well as a learning experience. It requires you to investigate what is the best of the best from already successful organizations so as to establish your own goals for excellence. It is now my pleasure to present to you our guest and expert speaker, Jerome Finnigan. Mr. Finnigan is Human Resources Manager at Xerox Corporate Research and Technology in El Segundo, California. He joined Xerox in 1966 and since then has held a variety of human resource positions in Los Angeles and Rochester, New York. He has also been responsible for Xerox's well-known benchmarking program. He was an early advocate of quality circles in the late 1970s and was quality officer for the printing systems division during Xerox's implementation of total quality. Mr. Finnigan is co-author with Dr. Warren Schmidt of two books on total quality management, The Race Without a Finish Line, America's Quest for Total Quality, 1992, and TQ Manager, a practical guide to managing in a total quality organization. Welcome, Mr. Finnigan. Before you begin your presentation, I would like to ask you the following question. Is benchmarking simply a strategy to copy your competitors' work practices and processes? And if so, is this applicable only to certain cultures and business styles?
Yes, Armando, benchmarking is copying. But let me make 2 points. First, there is nothing wrong in copying someone else's work when what is being copied is the best and the people you copy from know about it and approve. Second, this is not a culture-bound process. I recognize that exchanging information and copying others may be foreign to some, but it is an increasingly significant management tool and is being practiced by organizations in every country of the world.
We are now, let's listen to Mr. Finnigan's presentation, part 1. Thank you.
A lot has happened since I appeared on this series a year ago. NAFTA was passed, the world's commerce has become much more competitive, and more companies have started using benchmarking as a tool to combat this competition. And much more has been written about benchmarking. Benchmarking has truly become a core competency for organizations that wish to compete in the new global economy. These organizations recognize that in the new economy, power moves with knowledge, and that it transcends traditional limits because knowledge accompanies the people who work directly with our suppliers, our customers, and our competitors. Since many of you have probably learned more about benchmarking since last year's broadcast, and probably have had the opportunity to put it into practice, I thought today that I would try and update you on how benchmarking is being integrated into the operations of leading-edge organizations. During our first module this morning, We will begin with revising what benchmarking is and exploring why it has become a significant management tool. We'll later take a closer look at how benchmarking is being done by today's organizations and what it takes to be successful. In our second module, we'll explore how benchmarking supports the pursuit of such leading-edge issues as total quality, performance management, learning organizations, and re-engineering. No organization or individual can corner the market on good ideas. Go-it-alone types will only reinvent their own wheels. Therefore, it makes good sense to expand our learning from the experiences of others. Companies like Motorola, General Electric, GTE, Ford, and Xerox have used benchmarking to do just that, to learn from others how to help produce a dramatic improvement in their processes and profits. They use the benchmarking process to ferret out the root causes of the operating differences between themselves and their benchmarking partners. And then, by adopting and adapting the exemplary practices used by others, they have been able to accelerate their own progress. Let's briefly review some of the background material on benchmarking that we covered last year. First, what does benchmarking mean? Benchmarking's linguistic and metaphorical roots lie in land surveying, where a benchmark is a distinctive mark made on a rock, a wall, or a building, and serves as a reference point by which to determine a position or altitude in a topographical survey. In the 1950s, the term was used by mainframe computer customers to establish basic performance standards for vendors to bid against. In the 1970s, benchmarking entered the broader business lexicon when at Xerox we used the term to describe comparisons with our competitors. David Kearns, Xerox's CEO at the time, described benchmarking as the continuous process of measuring products, services, and practices against the toughest competitors or those companies recognized as industry leaders. Since then, the definition of benchmarking has grown to refer to the outreach activity of organizations comparing themselves against others. There are many definitions of benchmarking in use, but the one that I think is most helpful is from the benchmarking book, written by a former employee of mine, Michael Spendolini. In researching his book, Michael contacted 57 companies and interviewed their internal benchmarking experts to develop this definition. Benchmarking is a continuous, systematic process for evaluating the products, services, and work processes of organizations that are recognized as representing best practices for the purpose of organizational improvement. This is a good definition because operationally oriented organizations and functions should be able to relate to it easily. Anyone who thoroughly knows their operations will certainly see the value of ensuring that the very best practices available are incorporated or matched in their operations. The distinction between benchmarking and a benchmark perplexes many people. Think about it this way. Benchmarking is the process of an ongoing search for the best practices, while a benchmark is the measurement to gauge the performance of your function or operation relative to others. A benchmark is like a divining rod. It leads the organization to the area of hidden opportunities of innovation and performance improvement, while benchmarking is the actual process of digging out the facts and discovering the operating practices that yield the results. There are three primary types of benchmarking: internal, competitive, and functional. In many organizations, specific business practices are performed in more than one location, one department, one division, or even one country. For this reason, many organizations begin their benchmarking activities by comparing business practices internally. The company does not assume that it will discover best practices in this effort. It is merely a starting point to begin to identify the best internal business practices in the organization. In other words, the benchmarking learning process begins at home. As an example, Xerox regularly benchmarks with our affiliates in Asia and in Europe, as well as our manufacturing operations in Canada, Brazil, Venezuela, and Aguascalientes in Mexico. Internal benchmarking assumes that there are differences in the work processes of an organization as a result of differences in geography, local organizational history, the nature of managers and employees in different locations, and so on. Many organizations are able to realize immediate gains by identifying their best internal business practices and then transferring that information to other parts of the organization. The second type is competitive benchmarking. This involves identification of the products, services, and work processes of your organization's direct competitors. This information is valuable because your competitors' practices affect the perceptions of your customers, suppliers, shareholders, potential customers, and industry watchers, all of whom have a direct effect on your business success. Another advantage is that competitors use technologies and business practices that are the same or very similar to your own. You generally have much in common, and lessons learned from competitors can usually be transferred without a lot of translation. Functional or generic benchmarking involves the products, services, and work processes of organizations that may or may not be your direct competitors. The objective of functional benchmarking is to identify best practices in any type of organization that has established a reputation for excellence in a specific area. Functional should be applied broadly and can mean manufacturing, engineering, human resources, marketing, distribution, billing, payroll, almost anything. For example, at Xerox, our benchmark for distribution and warehousing is LL Bean, an outdoor clothing distributor. We have, since the early 1980s, had a free, open, non-threatening exchange with LL Bean. Another advantage to functional benchmarking is the opportunity for breakthroughs. A breakthrough is an opportunity to discover a paradigm shift. By looking at an organization that are outside of your industry, you may find within that function an approach that might apply elsewhere in your organization. As an example, while visiting LL Bean, Federal Express discovered that Bean used barcoding to manage their warehouse inventory and to track shipments. From that study, the notion for tracking packages by barcoding was born. Because of Federal Express's success with barcoding, it soon migrated to the airline industry for the tracking of luggage. In considering how benchmarking is done, there is yet another way to classify or think about benchmarking, and that is by three categories: performance, strategic, and process. The performance benchmarking category includes all research-based studies of competitors and industry participants. This research usually assesses a competitive position by focusing on price, technical quality, product or service features, and other performance characteristics. This is research based on the analysis of trends from database searches and surveys, and therefore requires the least amount of resource support, because such performance studies can be conducted by an experienced research-oriented librarian or by a market research department. Strategic benchmarking is a way to focus on the potential changes in a business by examining non-industry companies for significant business trends. This is usually done by establishing benchmarking alliances with a limited number of non-competing businesses. GE is probably the most successful proponent of this method. Strategic benchmarking requires a small professional team with long-term continuity. A compensation study is a good example of strategic benchmarking. Process benchmarking means seeking the best practices by face-to-face studies and observations of the key business processes, such as customer complaints, billing, order and fulfillment, recruitment, manufacturing, and strategic planning, regardless of who is the best practices candidate. Because process benchmarking requires the participation of subject matter experts, the owner of a process and a process team, the people who actually do the work, should be directly involved in conducting the study. For this reason, the process method requires the greatest investment. One helpful reason for thinking of the types of benchmarking this way, rather than just by internal, competitive, and functional, is that it allows an organization to gradually build its benchmarking capability. You can start with performance benchmarking, which requires the least resources, then go on to build partnerships with a consortium of organizations to better understand the strategic issues for your company. Incidentally, some of the organizations you can solicit might include your suppliers and major customers. All types of benchmarking require several elements to be successful: a well-designed performance measurement and benchmarking process, senior management support, training for the project team, useful information technology systems, cultural practices that encourage learning from others, and resources, including time, funding, and proper equipment. Although most of the elements of benchmarking are familiar to us, in combination they provide a new way of thinking about competitive analysis and internal goal setting. The question here is, how is benchmarking done? Let's review the benchmarking process in greater detail. First, every organization should adopt benchmarking practices to fit its own culture and needs. Most successful organizations have adopted a variant of the original 10-step process developed by Xerox to meet their particular needs. For example, there is the 4-phase process used by DEC. Alcoa has a 6-step process. AT&T has a 9-step model, and there are several others in between. Whatever the model or method you select, a sound benchmarking program is based on an iterative process that covers a minimum of 4 phases. Establishing the plan, what will be benchmarked, with whom and how. Conducting the study, how data will be collected. Diagnosing the data, interpreting the information. Internalizing results and taking action, how to make the best use of the intelligence you have gathered. Let me emphasize the word iterative. Although benchmarking is a process that builds step by step, it is nonetheless a flexible process. After each step, a previous step can be revisited and the basic direction of the study altered as necessary. For example, once data has been gathered, you may discover that you have obtained information beyond the scope of the original study, and either choose to expand the scope of the study or to put the new data aside for use later. Now, let's walk through each of the 4 phases. Phase 1, establishing the plan. In establishing a plan for a benchmarking effort, there are several questions to answer. What subject will be benchmarked? Who are the best organizations to be benchmarked? And will they be cooperative partners? By what methods will you gather the data? The purpose of this first phase is to organize. That is, to ensure that the project has a clear focus by prioritizing the functions or processes to study, selecting benchmarking partners, obtaining support from the process owners and stakeholders, and assigning the project to a team. Optimally, a benchmarking team will have 3 to 8 members, including representatives from all functions that manage the process under study. The team's responsibility is to prepare a project plan, a plan that includes a survey of people involved in the process, a purpose statement, proposed benchmark measures, methodology and scope, and resources needed. In deciding what will be benchmarked, remember that the focus is on a work process. Which of your work processes are the most critical to the overall success of your operation? Some examples of subjects that could be benchmarked are time to market, unit manufacturing costs, customer delivery, product quality. I'm sure you have other ideas of subjects that are critical to your own organization. Before you make your final selection, you will have to select a measurement to not only provide a metric, but also help define the benchmarking subject. As an example, if you choose product quality, what will you measure? Reliability? Mean time to repair? Repair costs? Once you know what you want to benchmark and how you're going to measure it, you will have to document the work process of your subject. Documenting work processes is best done by a flowchart, with as much detail as possible, reflecting all the process steps, all the inputs and all the outputs, and measures for each step. Certainly the people who perform this work should be involved in determining if all the steps have been included. Also, as you flowchart, you should consider the opportunities for cycle time reduction, not only in terms of process improvements, but for the benchmarking study as well. That is, you will want to compare your flowchart with your benchmark partners to be certain that you both perform the same steps. You might find that they have become the best of the best by merely removing unnecessary steps in their work process. Next, put the purpose of the study into a narrative statement. This is the touchstone that you will be using to assure your work remains on target, a sort of mission statement for the study. Such a statement should include the process output and customers. As an example, a purpose statement might sound like this. The purpose of this study is to evaluate our current level of customer service compared to others as measured by mean time between failures. The results of this study will help service management determine if we are adequately staffed with service reps or if we can improve productivity by acquiring new test equipment. One of the most important decisions to make in the planning phase is deciding who will be your benchmark partners. It is important to take the process of choosing a partner seriously, and remember that careful research is the key. First, put together a candidate list based upon the benchmarking team's understanding of what they want to benchmark. Do some secondary research to boil the candidate list down to 3 to 6 companies. Look at anything that is relevant in the last 3 to 5 years that pertains to what we want to benchmark, including anything in the public domain from business information services such as Dun & Bradstreet to annual reports to whatever is in the public press. In selecting benchmarking partners, the key factor should be performance excellence, not geographic proximity. 2 other factors are critical: that the proposed partners be enthusiastic about participating and that they be fully accessible. Once you choose your partners, you have to think through what information you are willing to share before you arrive at their doorstep. Recognize that if you ask a question, expect to answer some yourself. You really can't expect a company to reveal their work practices without your being willing to do the same. Therefore, decide beforehand what you can and cannot share and benchmark accordingly. The next planning step is to determine how you will gather the data. This will be partly affected by whether your study is internal, competitive, or functional, or whether you want to pursue a performance benchmark based solely on research, or gather a group of competitors to partner in a strategic study. There are 3 basic sources of information. Internal sources, such as functional experts, marketing analysts, and company librarians. Information available in the public domain, and original research. All three sources may be used, but before you choose a method, think about the amount and accuracy of the data you will require, the cost of the study, and the time that is available to conduct a study. All of these factors will have an effect on which method you choose. Next, develop a questionnaire. A list of the questions you want to ask your partners in developing the questionnaire. Remember two things. First, keep the questionnaire short and significant. In his book, The Benchmarking Workbook, Gregory Watson describes an experience he had at Compaq, a Fortune 100 company that had just started benchmarking, requested to benchmark Compaq, and Watson agreed to participate. He learned later that the company had selected only Compaq as a partner and had submitted a questionnaire of 57 questions that they planned to have answered in a 4-hour face-to-face meeting. That would allow only for a 4-minute response per question and no time for discussion or follow-up. Watson contrasted this approach with that of Xerox, which also wanted to benchmark Compaq on the same topic. Xerox submitted only 11 questions to be discussed during an 8-hour session. The distinction between these two examples is a combination of both benchmarking experience and the ability to follow a standard process. The value of following a standard process when conducting a benchmarking study is that the resulting information will have a higher quality because it is targeted more to your company's specific needs, and second, can you answer your own questions? By answering your own questions, you may discover that the data is not as easy to obtain as you thought. If you can't answer your questions, don't expect anyone else to. Also, you will need your answers as a base point to compare the results from your partners. Finally, to complete the plan, obtain a management champion for the study, someone who will sell the study to his or her management peers. It is possible that some managers will at first be resistant to a benchmarking study, especially if they consider the results threatening. For this reason, it is wise to have early buy-in by the management most affected by the results. Not only will this make communications and implementation easier, it is necessary to have management support at the beginning in order to obtain the resources and time required to conduct the study. Recently at Xerox, we conducted a benchmarking study to determine how other organizations funded their research and technology efforts. We decided to focus on large, high-technology companies with divisional organizational structures like ourselves. We looked for organizations with a reputation for successful research and technology management processes, and where we had appropriate contacts. We selected AT&T, General Motors, 3M, and Hewlett-Packard for partners. The kind of metrics we agreed upon were organization structure, size and demographics, budget by organization, and funding models, and how these organizations approach learning and intellectual property. Now we will discuss phase 2, conducting the study. Implementing your benchmarking plan is determined by the method that you have selected. For example, if you are using a mail survey, it is helpful to telephone in advance to be certain the survey will be welcome. Be certain that any mail survey questionnaire is attractive and easy to complete, and that it is sent by first-class mail, and that you have included a stamped returned envelope. To start with a telephone survey, set the time in advance. Have your questionnaire at hand. You will also have wanted to review all the data you have about the company in advance. In considering who should conduct the study, as I said, the most effective method is to construct a team consisting of those people who will be implementing the process that are developed as a result of the study. In fact, anyone who can contribute to the study or the implementation of actions should be involved in benchmarking. Some organizations hire consultants to conduct their benchmarking studies. Consultants can be very valuable when you are unable to be objective about the subject, or when you want to access competitive organizations and it is difficult. I encourage you not to limit your study exclusively to one consultant, because you need the benefit of some first-hand experience. I advise you to check the references and experience of all potential consultants. There will be many times when it is advantageous to visit your partner's site in order to observe a work process or to get to know your partners better. In making site visits, there are several things to remember, such as using your eyes and ears and representing yourself and your organization honestly, because effective benchmarking requires the careful building of an environment of trust, cooperation, and learning between organizations. Developing such mutual respect requires more than a common process. It requires a shared understanding of ethical guidelines. Therefore, do not ask others to tell you things you would not be willing to reciprocate with. Do not misrepresent yourself or your company. Respect another's proprietary rights. Always review your company's ethics policy before starting benchmarking, and talk to your legal staff before visiting another company. To get the most out of your investment of visiting another organization, follow some simple guidelines. Travel in pairs or small groups during the site tour to facilitate note-taking and questioning. Arrange for follow-up conversations should there be additional questions. Use your industry jargon to facilitate your exchange, but be careful that your organization's jargon does not creep in. Conduct a post-session debriefing as soon after the visit as possible to discuss the team's observations and ideas. Prepare a trip report summarizing the site visit's findings and conclusions. Send both a thank you note and, if necessary, your request for the partner confirm the accuracy of the visit notes. In our recent research and technology funding study, we worked with a team of 8 with one team member responsible for each partner. This person arranged for pre-reading, pre-exchanges, and meeting agendas, and post-trip exchanges. The questionnaires were developed by the whole team and pre-exchanged with the partners before answers were solicited. Next comes phase 3, diagnosing the data. Evaluating the data you have gathered is quite simple. Simply answer the following questions. What does the study data tell you? Is the competition better? And if so, how much better? Why are they better? And what have you learned that you can put into action to improve your operations? The first step is to tabulate the data and determine if your partners are better than you. Compare your own internal measurement data against your partners, making sure that there is consistency